Hi there, it's finally that time of the month in which we get to chat about everything I watched and you get to share all the films, series, documentaries you've enjoyed watching, you hated. So as always, make sure to leave a comment down below and share the titles. As you know, many of the films and series and documentaries I watched are based on your suggestions. This month's list is a little odd, so let's jump right to it, also because there's quite a lot to talk about. The first film on the list of what I watched this month is a classic I never got round to watching, Good Morning Vietnam, starring Robin Williams as a radio host during the Vietnam War. He basically has a show on a radio station which the American soldiers over in Vietnam would listen to. But instead of following the strict guidelines imposed by the army, he would stray onto other topics. He would talk about the war, he would joke about the war, he would joke about the soldiers' conditions, about politics. He was very politically incorrect. And while the soldiers loved it as it lifted their spirits, it was all not very appreciated by certain superiors. And in addition to this, Robin Williams' character develops a relationship with some locals, especially with a young woman, which leads to more, which I will not reveal because of spoilers. Overall, I'm very pleased I finally watched this film, and it made me want to delve deeper into the life and career of Robin Williams, which unfortunately I only know on a very superficial level. Next up on the list is a very little known Australian film called Hounds of Love. Now, I only discovered this film because I was in a free trial for Mubi, which is basically a subscription service, a streaming service, which offers more curated niche movies. They're sometimes by lesser known filmmakers. Anyway, Hounds of Love is absolutely nerve-wracking. It's a story of a couple who kidnap a girl and they keep her hostage in her house, where they do anything imaginable and unimaginable to her. It's very animalistic, and there is a great portrayal of the characters on both sides of this situation, as well as the girl's family back at home. Of course, I'm not going to spoil the whole plot, but it's basically one nightmarish hell which is never afraid to make you feel as uncomfortable as possible. Then again on Mubi, I watched another film which instead is more well known. I'd seen more of it on social media, and it's a beautiful Kenyan film called Rafiki. And as I always say, please don't be afraid to try films from other countries, including films from countries about which people would only think their movies are bad. Foreign films aren't just French and Korean. Rafiki, for example, is a beautiful, beautiful movie. It's the relationship that develops between two young women in Kenya who are struggling with society's requirements: be a good wife, stay at home, never aim too high, suppress your real identity, whereas they dream of achieving more and actually living their lives. And one moment really struck me when one of the girls says she is pleased because she wants to become a nurse, and the other girl says, "Why not a doctor?" Now, this doesn't absolutely mean that nurses are any less valuable. In that context, it means that many people, women or not, are often afraid of stepping out their comfort zone and defining their own goals in life. Trust me, go watch Rafiki. It has a beautiful soundtrack, beautiful cinematography. It's lovely. And the last film I watched on Mubi was The Suspect, which I only later realized you guys had been repeatedly suggesting me to watch, and I can definitely see why, because it's a pretty intriguing movie. It is a Danish film starring Mads Mikkelsen, who in the story portrays a teacher who is accused of molesting a child. Now, without spoilers, for what I can say, we don't actually see this happen. So we're relying on what characters on both sides of the story are saying. We have to pick who to believe. And in addition to that, the film explores how society treats a person who is even just accused of something, even before any proof of that turns up. So it offers a lot of food for thought. Next up, I watched Ted 2. Now, although I might pass off as this artsy film snub, trust me, it's nothing like that, absolutely. But for some reason, I might give off the impression of being somebody who wouldn't enjoy the Ted movies. Instead, I love them. Actually, once I stayed in Boston for a couple of days and I had a bit of a hyper moment because I found out the hotel we were staying at was the one where they filmed the first Ted film. Anyway, I liked the first film and I pretty much enjoyed this sequel. Basically, the premise to the Ted films is that this toy bear is alive and he's very loud, often rude, he smokes weed, drinks beer, hangs out in bars with his friends. And in this second chapter, this all continues, but the theme is that his humanity is challenged because he has a girlfriend and they get to the point in which they want kids. But people around him start to question whether he actually is a living creature who deserves rights, or whether he's just a property, an object. Just like the first Ted film, it's wonderfully hilarious, even with its quote stupid moments, and it's perfect for a pizza and movie night with your friends. And I forgot to mention that Ted's best friend is portrayed by Mark Wahlberg, and I wanted to say this because the next film on the list is another one starring Mark Wahlberg, and it's called The Happening, a film which I had never heard about, but I then discovered it's by M. Night Shyamalan, who is famous for some very creepy plots. He did The Sixth Sense, he did The Visit, Split and Glass, the Unbreakable trilogy, all these kinds of films. Anyway, you will love The Happening if you enjoyed movies like Bird Box, about an ominous, mysterious threat, because it's set in your normal day-to-day life, but in which people suddenly start acting very weird, and without spoilers, many of them don't survive, and nobody can figure out what's tied them together, what's the common factor in these tragic events. And Mark Wahlberg is part of a small group of people who are sticking together while making their way across the country trying to survive. And just as we all realised with Bird Box, we're not afraid of monsters, we're more afraid of the unknown. So definitely an interesting pick. Also in March, I watched the new version of Mulan, which I was very curious about, as many people absolutely despise this film. The original Mulan film from the 90s was and still is one of the most loved classic Disney films because of the cinematography, the character arc, the music, all things which people struggle to find in this new movie. Both films are based on the ancient legend of Mulan, who was a young woman who took her father's place in the army. So basically she has to pretend that she's a man. Of course, this creates some funny moments, but it also gives you a lot to think about. Now I'm going to controversially say, and just wait to the end of this, I'm going to controversially say that I don't think Mulan is that bad as some people have called it. It's just a completely different story from the first movie. This isn't the Beauty and the Beast live action remake, which is the same story. It includes many key elements, but it has a totally different setup. It's not a Mulan remake. You're actually more likely to find different elements compared to those in common with the first film. And if you watch it bearing that in mind, bearing that it's just based on this ancient Chinese legend, it's not that bad. Now I say not that bad because it's still not a good movie. It does have many scenes which don't make any sense, including huge plot holes, continuity errors. It's just a lot of CGI for the sake of showing off good CGI. But so I'm not saying this is a good movie, but it's far from these atrocious, unwatchable kind of reviews, which I think were based on the idea of wanting to relive the original 90s film. So if you're planning on watching this, just don't go into it expecting it to be a remake of the first film. It's just a totally different project. I don't even think it was their intention to remake the first film. Another sequel I watched is Coming to America, the sequel to Coming to America, a classic comedy from the 80s. Now in my family, we absolutely love the original movie from the 80s. It never fails to make us crack up. It's a story of an African prince who moves from his huge palace all the way to a small flat in Queens, New York, where he ends up working at a fake McDonald's, befriending the locals and learning what real life is, including finding a real girlfriend, something which he struggled with back home, as women would behave more as servants in his presence rather than showing their own real, true personality. Because of the success of the first film, many people were excited about the sequel. It was hugely advertised, but in my opinion, it's not worth it. In the sequel, the prince returns to America because he receives news that he might have a long-lost son over there. But the whole film is just references to the original chapter, nothing more. In some points, they didn't even bother and just slapped in actual clips from the first movie. I think the only creative thing was a huge, blatant Pepsi product placement within the first minutes, if not seconds, of the movie. Next up, I watched a film called A Teacher, which I had never heard about. It's not particularly well made, but the theme is interesting. Or let's say the way the theme is presented. It's a story of a teacher who has a secret relationship with one of her students. And in addition to the fact that there are a million things wrong with this, it is also something very hard to hide. And the interesting aspect is that this film doesn't only analyse trying to keep this hidden from society, but it shows how insanely crazy and addicted to this relationship the teacher is. She just can't seem to quit it, even when the kid starts to show signs of, kind of wanted to get out of this. So it's a pretty interesting analysis of a topic that, first of all, isn't actually portrayed that much in media, but also in under this spiraling of craving this relationship, but also hating herself for being in it. It's interesting. I then rewatched a film I've actually seen quite a few times. I think I actually spoke about this film just a few months ago in one of these videos. It's kind of a funny story. And it's a mix of both hilarious and meaningful moments. In this film, a teenager is feeling overwhelmed by everything in his life, and due to a suicide scare, he is admitted to a psychiatric hospital. But due to ongoing renovations, teens and adults are all put together in one ward, where he gets to befriend various people, including Zach Galifianakis' and Emma Roberts' characters. Now, this film could easily be overlooked as just a silly, simple comedy about crazy people. But in reality, it goes way deeper, and it also proves how actors such as Zach Galifianakis are great both in comedic and more dramatic roles. Overall, it's very fun, but then it would just suddenly punch you in the guts with just like an absolutely traumatic and deep and sad and meaningful moment. I think one of the reasons why I've rewatched it so often is because of this great combination of different themes. I then watched a Canadian film called Gabrielle, about a woman with Williams syndrome, a disability actually shared in real life by the actress herself. This film is very touching. It's the story of a young woman who lives in a centre for disabled people. I'm not sure what the actual correct terminology is, but it's basically a facility where various disabled people live and where daily common tasks and activities are taken care of by their carers. So a lot of the common responsibilities of living alone are something Gabrielle doesn't really need to worry about. But on the other hand, as an adult, she wants to be independent, especially when she falls in love. She dreams of owning her own place, running her own finances. She hates seeing people close to her live in a so-called normal life. So the film basically analyzes all the overlooked aspects of an adult disabled person's life, including some things I had never considered. For example, there is one scene in which everybody in Gabrielle's life is basically discussing about having her sterilized so she will not have kids, without even considering asking her in the first place if that's something she wants to do. So it's a very interesting project, especially knowing that the actress herself shares the same disability as her character. Next up, I was completely forgetting to talk about Minari, an A24 film I had been going on for ages over on social media and which I can now finally talk about. Minari is one of the latest A24 films people had been waiting to watch for ages. It has already won a ton of prizes. Who knows, maybe by the time you're watching this video, there might also be some Oscars to add on to that list. Minari is the story of a Korean family who immigrate to the United States during the 80s specifically in a pretty rural area of the country, so not a bustling multicultural city, and it analyses all the concept of fitting in a new life, the struggles adapting to an American lifestyle, while also keeping your own traditions. There's also all the analysis of the children of immigrant families who maybe want to feel more belonging to the new country. For example, there is one scene in which the child says, "Oh, it smells like Korea in here," something which the parents obviously do not appreciate. I can definitely see where all the praise towards this film came from. It's a beautiful depiction of a very down-to-earth situation with very intense and realistic acting. I then rewatched Billy Elliot, a classic British film I would definitely recommend checking out if you haven't already. It's the story of a family in a very poor area in northern England. The local business is mining, but the miners are on strike in addition to personal issues at home. So it's all a very macho, gruff man kind of environment, if that makes sense. And the kid of one of these families one day falls in love with ballet and starts secretly training to become a dancer, something which is seen in an awful light by his family, who try in every way to stop him. But it's not the "oh, dad's chasing me down the street because he thinks I'm gay for being a dancer" funny kind of situation. It's a very intense and nearly dramatic kind of environment, because the father is dealing with many problems of his own, and then he is torn between the love for his son but not wanting to accept him doing something which was considered very inappropriate for a man. It's beautiful. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Next up, I watched a film which I'm still trying to figure out. It felt like a sort of fever dream. It's called Bringing Out the Dead, starring Nicolas Cage, and I then discovered it's actually directed by Martin Scorsese. We basically watch Nicolas Cage's exhausted paramedic character over 3 of his night shifts trying to save people around Manhattan. But he is basically spiraling into insanity. He's haunted by visions of a woman he wasn't able to save. He's sick of never managing to save everybody, of hospitals being overwhelmed with patients and having to make choices of who is saved first. But it's very weird. The cinematography in it is very weird because it shows him slowly spiraling into this near madness of being overwhelmed by his thoughts, and then he's drinking. It's very intense, very peculiar. I probably have to rewatch it again because maybe I also missed something that I had to read between the lines here. And I guess one of the objectives of this film was probably to make you feel as uncomfortable as the protagonist is. I then watched a comedy called 2 Days in New York, which is basically one of these stories in which everything goes wrong. The protagonists are a couple living in New York who are visited by their French relatives for just a couple of days, but who manage to create absolute chaos in their lives. So it's one of those what could go wrong kind of stories. It's not a high concept comedy. It's just one of those silly, funny, what's going to happen next? How could this even get any worse kind of scenarios? So, it's just one of those snowballing kind of situations, just a fun light comedy. In March, I also watched Zack Snyder's Justice League. I'm not going to talk too much about this to not bore those who have heard me talk about this countless times over live streams. There's actually a full standalone spoiler-free video about Justice League on my channel if you want to check that out. But of course, I'm going to quickly speak about this as it was one of the films I watched this month. Briefly summed up, this famous Snyder Cut is director Zack Snyder returning years after leaving the original Justice League project, which eventually made it to cinemas under a new team and was met with atrocious reviews. This is basically Zack Snyder returning, bringing the film as he originally intended it to be, and the general consensus is that he actually did a pretty good job at doing this. The Justice League is a team of superheroes assembled by Batman, Bruce Wayne, in order to defend Earth from an imminent out-of-worldly attack. So in addition to the usual superhero movie epic fight scenes, We get to know each superhero, why they became who they are, what their strengths and struggles are, why they might be reluctant to join the team, and why they're all equally important for the outcome of their mission. Overall, Zack Snyder was able to take everything that was wrong with the first film, amend it, and give us what, in the end, actually really is an epic story. Another film I'm going to quickly mention, or to better say 3, other Twilight films, that specifically clips Breaking Dawn Part 1 and Breaking Dawn Part 2. Again, as with the Snyder Cut, I have talked about the Twilight films countless times here on my channel, so I will not bore you further. Again, I will leave linked the full standalone video on that topic. But basically, because my birthday is right at the end of February, over that weekend I rewatched all the Twilight saga, because they are trash, but they're our trash. The Twilight films are flawed in ways which are basically unimaginable to those who haven't seen them. But for those like me who loved them back as a little emo kid, they just stole a piece of heart and became a guilty pleasure. For more context, the Twilight books and films are the story of a vampire and a normal high school girl who fall in love, going beyond anything humanly and societally correct, and this all sort of snowballs into an epic love story, but with a cringe fiesta. Then I watched the first Final Destination film, because over the years I'd always seen bits of the various films in the series. I never sat down and watched a full Final Destination film, but for example, I did recognize many scenes while watching this movie. The whole Final Destination concept starts with a group of people who narrowly avoid death, and because of this, they are continuously haunted by absurd deaths. In these films, people die in the most ridiculous ways. For example, a bolt from an object might slip off and fall into an air vent, which then leads to fire, which then leads to another thing, and so on. People get stuck in places, they trip on simple objects and die in the most gory ways possible. All of this because they avoided death when they should have died. If you're paranoid, this film will make you even more paranoid, and it's a great film to watch together with your friends. Next up on the list is Moxie, which I had originally misinterpreted completely as something I might be interested in, but which then revealed itself to be something completely different. I don't know why, but I expected this film to be about this sort of punk, rebellious mother who passes down this spirit onto her teenage daughter. And it's kind of like that, but under an exaggerately woke perspective. Basically, this teenager wants to tackle some issues at her school, like the predominantly white books they have to read, the sexist comments that occur, and she uses her mother's rebellious past to inspire her. But the film never actually tackles topics in a serious manner. It's more under this woke Instagram perspective, which doesn't actually do anything. I guess this was aiming at a younger audience, so they wanted to convey the topic in an easier, lighter way that they might appreciate and they might actually keep in consideration. Next up, I rewatched The Devil's Advocate, one of my favourite films of all time, starring Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino. Now, I would strongly recommend watching this film, but I would also strongly advise to not watch anything about this film, no trailers, to avoid spoilers, because this film works great when you know nothing about it. In this film, Keanu Reeves portrays a very successful lawyer from a small town who is offered to move to New York with his girlfriend and work for a huge law firm. At first, everything appears fantastic, the perks of the job are incredible, but as time progresses, things are not what they seem, and I'll leave it at that. If you have seen the film, quite a few years ago, I made a video explaining the whole film. I do look very different in that video, but it did point out quite a few interesting things if you want to check it out. I then watched The Bachelorette, which basically revolves around a group of women, one of whom is getting married, so everything surrounding the wedding, under a comedic perspective. And it's packed with all the stereotypes of a comedy about getting married, the sad friend drinking wine, the jealous moment, the inappropriate comment and subsequent fight. I wouldn't particularly recommend watching this film. It does have some funny moments, but overall it's not actually that good. I'd rather recommend, if you want that topic, I'd rather recommend watching a film like Bridesmaids. That's really funny. I then watched Dorothy Mills, a thriller film which actually ends up define your expectations. I won't say too much because of spoilers, but you will be surprised in a way you didn't expect while watching this film. The protagonist is a psychiatrist assigned to the case of Dorothy, this girl who was accused of attempting to murder an infant she was babysitting. So the film mostly follows this woman interviewing Dorothy and those around her, understanding how her mind works, and I won't say more because of spoilers. But with that, we have reached the end of today's list. If you're still watching, thank you so much for sticking around right until the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to comment down below what you've been watching, what films, series, documentaries, what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy. Share the titles down below. Also, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.